We go behind the scenes as New York gears up for the April 19th primary, and an investigative look at recurring problems with Amtrak. This is Talking Points. Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. I'm your host, Alex Amico. Here's a quick recap of the week. Mississippi recently passed the Protecting Freedom of Conscience from Government Discrimination Act, which protects those who deny services to LGBT people due to religious beliefs. Multiple groups have quickly acted to protest this new law, including New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who's banned non-work-related travel to Mississippi until the law is repealed. Wisconsin held their presidential primaries on Tuesday. Ted Cruz came in first place with 48.2% of the votes for the Republicans, beating Donald Trump by roughly 12%. Governor John Kasich finished in third with 14%. Cruz and Trump picked up 36 and 6 delegates respectively, and Kasich gained none. Rebecca Mason, an aide to Alabama Governor Robert Bentley, resigned this morning after accusations that the two had an affair. Explicit recordings of Governor Bentley and Ms. Mason were made public last week. The governor has denied the accusations, saying that the recordings were made 2 years ago and the two were never in a sexual relationship, despite the graphic nature of the tapes. Many have called for Bentley's resignation, but he says he will not step down. This past Sunday, Edward Snowden tweeted that the, quote, biggest leak in the history of data journalism just went live, and it's about corruption. Here in studio to give more insight on the so-called Panama Papers, we have Talking Points correspondents Joey Lino and Madeline Urabe. Thanks for joining me, guys. So, Edward Snowden, obviously architect of the NSA leaks, huge following, big in things such as this nature. What is this following? What is this corruption that he's talking about?
Well, Snowden is referencing the Panama Papers, which are a leak of 11.5 million documents from a Panama-based law firm called Mossack Fonseca. Mossack Fonseca, the documents are indicate how they helped create shell corporations for the global elite to hide their wealth and avoid taxes. The papers were leaked anonymously to a German news source, and the German news source then sent them to the International Consortium for Investigative Journalism, or ICIJ, based in Washington, D.C., who spent a year with 400 journalists in 80 different countries secretly combing through these papers to find out what they reveal, and the results were somewhat alarming and were reported on Sunday.
Right. Now, and it's pretty important to remember these papers are from one law firm in one offshore tax haven, Panama. So how big is it right now, and how big could it get?
Well, actually, it's about 11.5 million documents. And we have a graph here. I'm going to throw out a lot of big numbers. So we have a graph to kind of show to scale what this is going to be showing. So on this graph, the first that's going to go up is the WikiLeaks, which happened in 2010, which had 250,000 documents, which is about 1.7 gigabytes of data. It's about the size of 1.5 movies downloaded on your computer. Then there was the Snowden leaks in 2013, and that contained about 1.5 million documents. And as you can see, the 11.5 documents that were leaked in the Panama Papers is significantly larger. So those 2.6 terabytes of data, that's right, terabytes of data, is equivalent to about 200 high-definition 1080p movies. So it's as if you had 200 space for 200 downloaded movies of Frozen.
Do you want to build 200 snowmen?
This is a lot of data we're talking about here.
I don't particularly want to build 200 snowmen, but this leak came on Sunday. It's Thursday now. What's the immediate impact been so far?
So people in Iceland were protesting on Tuesday for their prime minister, who is leaked, I should say, to Mossack Fonseca.
He was connected through he co-owned a British Virgin Islands company called Winters Inc. with his wife, and then shortly before becoming prime minister, he sold off all of his shares to his wife for $1 before becoming prime minister. However, a spokesman for his administration, for him, said that there was nothing wrong and he obeyed all Icelandic laws in all of his behavior, but a lot of the protests alleged that he was not fully disclosing all of his financial.
And even though he denied it, he still stepped down. And today, Iceland appointed a new prime minister. So basically, going off of that, these are the most extreme actions that have occurred. However, with the EU,
Yeah, today the EU announced that they were threatening Panama and other tax havens with sanctions if they refuse to comply with international law. And today we actually found out as well that David Cameron admitted that he did benefit from his father's offshore company in a tax haven.
which was through Mossack
right.
Fonseca.
Yes,
Right.
yes, through
And now-
Mossack
And
Fonseca.
we have, Obama actually spoke on this earlier, discussing that these offshore firms are legal, but the laws behind them show that it's kind of shady to have one.
Yeah, I think we have a clip of Obama saying that. If we could go to that.
It's not that they're breaking the laws, it's that the laws are so poorly designed that they allow people, if they've got enough lawyers and enough accountants, to wiggle out of responsibilities that ordinary citizens are having to abide by.
As the president said, it is important to note that having an offshore account is not exactly illegal, but if you're doing it for illegal actions, such as such as avoiding taxes, hiding proceeds from crime, pocketing the money yourself that could be subject to sanctions, that all is illegal. Now, a lot of companies that deal with firms that are in different countries or families that have parties in different countries, they use these offshore firms because there's a tax neutral benefit. That way, like if you have a Uganda country versus, or Uganda versus Britain, the taxes are different. So if you do it properly, then you're doing it legally. But if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, such as, like I said earlier, avoiding taxes, that's obviously illegal.
And now, you've mentioned that it's in some cases offshore tax havens are legal, and in this case, we've got quite a few big names. You know, we've got the Icelandic Prime Minister. You mentioned David Cameron. People connected to Vladimir Putin's inner circle. Members of the Chinese Politburo. I guess the big question is, why should we care about this? What is the what affects your average everyday person in these papers?
Well, for me at least, there are two main issues with this story, and that's at first the simple loss of revenue. People not paying taxes is loss of revenue that could be used for services the citizens of really, really poor countries depend on. In Uganda, for example, there was an oil company that avoided paying $404 million in taxes by using offshore accounts.
And those taxes can be used. Oh, go ahead.
Right. No, those taxes can be used for basically
Well, like
just to improve the
healthcare,
country.
exactly. So
Healthcare,
people going to
infrastructure,
hospitals
things like
don't
that.
have the supplies that they need.
Right.
So that's the issue.
Thank you for joining us. And here to break down the beginning of the conflict and the latest ceasefire in Azerbaijan and Armenia is Talk Points correspondent Zina Saifi. Zina?
EU leaders remains firmly fixed on Syria's civil war, the refugee crisis, and the threat posed by the Islamic State. The sudden eruption of violence in the Nagorno-Karabakh region and internationally unrecognized Armenian-dominated territory within Azerbaijan has come as a nasty shock to many. For those of you who don't know, Azerbaijan and Armenia are two neighboring countries located in the region of Eurasia. After the Russian Revolution, they both proclaimed their independence on the same day in 1918. That was until they were annexed and occupied again by the successor state, the Soviet Union. Since the countries lie so close to each other, after their independence, both of them laid claim to territory known as the Nagorno-Karabakh region, which they saw as historically and ethnically to be theirs. These territorial disputes led to the so-called Armenian-Azerbaijani War between 1918 and 1920, a series of conflicts that ended only when both Armenia and Azerbaijan were swallowed by the Soviet Union. Although the territory is predominantly ethnically Armenian, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin placed it under Azerbaijan control in 1922. However, as a result, the Armenian population of this mountainous, landlocked enclave began a longitudinal push for unification with Armenia. The Armenians managed to take control of the region in 1944 after the deaths of nearly 30,000 people, and as the Soviet Union broke up, a full-scale war began in 1991. A ceasefire brokered by Russia was signed in 1994, but the two countries have never agreed on a lasting peace. Russia has traditionally supported the Christian Armenians, while Turkey is an ally of Azerbaijan. And as we all know, Russia and Turkey are locked in a bitter dispute over the war in Syria. This past weekend, 46 people were killed in 3 days of fighting, the worst series of fighting since the 1994 ceasefire. The cause of the renewed violence isn't clear, but both sides point to the other as the source of provocation. On Sunday, Azerbaijan announced a unilateral truce, but it failed to stop the fighting. Consequently, on Monday, Azerbaijan's defense ministry said that on the basis of a mutual agreement, military actions on the contact line between the armed forces of Armenia and Azerbaijan are halted. So until now, a long-simmering violent feud in Eurasia is on pause. However, the area still definitely remains volatile.
So, Zina, you mentioned that there's been this tremendous conflict recently between Russia and Turkey through sort of diplomacy and sort of brinksmanship. So what sort of role do they play in this conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia?
So clearly, both sides have expressed support for Armenia and Azerbaijan. Turkey said that the ceasefire seems as if Azerbaijan lost its territory, but that it'll help it get it back under all means. So that's Turkey's side. Russia's side is a bit tricky because although it proclaims its support for Armenia, it is the #1 arms supplier for Azerbaijan. So Russia has always wanted to have this control in these protracted conflicts within the previous Soviet territory. So I think it just wants to remain, keep its influence within this territory. But definitely if it comes to it and there's an actual conflict, and Turkey is obviously going to side with Armenia, Azerbaijan, it'll definitely side with Armenia.
Zina Saifi, thank you for joining us. We'll be right back.
Jimmy can't sing, and Tommy can't dance, so we're gonna put some ants in their pants. Aww.
Kids will spend 22 minutes watching us, the super duper party troopers, sing about ants in their pants.
Isn't that funny? Ants in their pants, they got ants in their pants, they got ants in their pants.
Brushing for 2 minutes now can save your child from severe tooth pain later. 2 minutes, twice a day. They have the time.
I've got a job to do today.
I've got a job to do today.
Have a good first day at work, Mom.
Your donations to Goodwill fund job training programs right in your community.
Feels good to start fresh, right?
Sure does.
And like that, you're a job creator.
Bernie Sanders has won 7 out of the last 8 contests, capped off with his latest win in Wisconsin. Ever since, the battle between Clinton and Sanders has been heating up ahead of their next big battle in the New York primary. The two have been questioning each other's qualifications, and here with the latest are Molly Smith and Hearns Laguerre Jr. Thank you for joining me. So, Hearns, last week we talked about how Democrats viewed the likely Republican nominees. It's pretty well documented how Republicans view Hillary Clinton, but what are they saying about Bernie Sanders looking to a general election?
Well, the main thing that they get Bernie Sanders on is for him being a democratic socialist. Mm-hmm. They harp on that and how being a socialist is against American values and how socialism pretty much goes against democratic values and foundations and whatnot. But what they gloss over is the fact that socialism is just a way to get people who don't have the means and ways to make a way for themselves. It gives them that pretty much the opportunity. But I think one thing that's funny is that a few months ago, Hillary Clinton was deemed the top candidate to be the Democratic nominee.
Right.
But in the past couple months, Bernie Sanders has become a viable competitor as well.
That's exactly right. Just like Hearns was saying, that Bernie has really been on quite a roll lately. You know, looking just recently at Wisconsin and Michigan, he's picking up huge states in the Midwest with a lot of delegates up for grabs. And you know, like it really is coming as a huge boost to his campaign. If you look at Wall Street, obviously this is where Hillary's bread and butter lies. Mm-hmm. That, you know, 70+%, according to a recent Citigroup poll, of Wall Street constituents will say Hillary is not only the Democratic nominee, but the next president of the United States. But obviously Wall Street is not all of America, and you know, Bernie's message is really resonating with the hearts of many Americans.
Right. And Hearns, so going back to that, there's always the argument Wall Street versus Main Street. Bernie's message is resonating. What are the big differences and I guess similarities between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton?
Well, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders actually have a lot of similarities. They both agree on like a lot of individual rights. For example, abortion, how is a woman's unrestricted right, legally requiring women, hiring women and minorities. They're both comfortable with same-sex marriage, making voter registration easier, expanding Obamacare, and the list just goes on. I would say the main thing that they disagree with is EPA regulations and how they're too restrictive. Privatizing Social Security and expanding the military. On those issues, they both have very different views on it. But I think one thing that we have to focus on is how Bernie Sanders represents the non-establishment, pretty much everything that a normal politician is, and Hillary Clinton represents the establishment. So it's almost in a way separating the Democratic Party into two groups that represent both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton for two different reasons.
And like you were just saying, Herds, like what each of them represent, and Alex and I were just talking about this earlier, that Sanders is really the candidate that we're looking at as far as idealism and really going, his views are incredibly ambitious, whereas Hillary is more the stable candidate, more the pragmatic candidate. Right. And most recently, this feud evolving between the two of them where the battle is really getting heated. And I think we can actually take a listen to
I don't think we have time to take a listen, but you're right. There's been this difference. Bernie's very ambitious. Hillary is quoted as saying, I'm a progressive, but a progressive likes to get things done. Hearns and Molly, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Primaries are only 2 weeks away in New York, and the election board in Onondaga County is hard at work making sure everything is ready and running properly when the polls open on the 19th. To see just how much work goes into making elections like this primary happen, Talking Points correspondent Thomas Viola went to the Onondaga County Board of Elections office.
The Onondaga County Board of Elections is making the final preparations for this month's primaries.
It's like a small mobilization of a little army.
Commissioner Dustin Zarni says a lot of preparation is required to make the electoral process go smoothly.
For any election, we'll spend at least 60 days before that getting ready, but we're always preparing. We're catching up on all our registrations that were done before the March 25th deadline. We had a huge surge of registrations right at the end, and we have about 1,500 to 2,000 that we're catching up on right now, and we're making sure we're processing those so we can print our poll books later this week.
On April 19th, more than 2,000 polling inspectors will report to 182 polling locations in Onondaga County to help make sure every voter is able to cast their ballot. Right now, voting machines are being calibrated and ready to be shipped. This process takes about 45 minutes per machine. But when you have 270 of them to be sent out, it can be quite a while. Workers like Derek Taylor have spent the last 5 days getting the machines ready for the election.
There's more to elections behind the scenes that I think voters don't necessarily realize, or at least I didn't when I signed up. I was like, wow, these election inspectors really work their butts off.
Taylor will spend even more time on election day as a poll worker as well.
Even like before polls open, we get there a half hour to an hour beforehand, set everything up, make sure everything's working, make sure we have all of our material, and then we usually stay about an hour and a half to 2 hours after polls close.
For all the hard work that goes into the election, Taylor has just one message for the public.
Vote! Make sure you vote!
When voters do make it to the polls on April 19th, it will be the result of more than 2 months and countless hours of work from workers and volunteers at the election board offices. When we come back, a look at this past year's Amtrak derailments. Stay with us.
Oh my goodness. I like discovering new things. You get to see what works for you and what doesn't. That helps you evolve as a person. You get to make like a supernova of skill or talent or whatever it is. I've always wanted to go to college. I just feel like that's my destiny. My name is Queen, and I am your dividend.
New York's I-Stop law went into effect, where New York became the first state to mandate that all prescriptions for medications and controlled substances must be submitted electronically. The law is still in its early stages, but lawmakers are confident that it will help cut down on prescription fraud. Here to break down what this law means for the medical community and for New Yorkers is Talking Points correspondent Dan Prager. Dan, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with, I guess, why? Why e-prescriptions as opposed to paper prescriptions?
Well, really the main reason is that it cuts down on fraud. There's a lot of cases of fraud happening to get prescription drugs like OxyContin and Vicodin, controlled substances. Forgeries on paper are really easy. You can just change a number, and there are people who have these prescription pads that aren't really licensed or are retired. Now, electronic prescriptions make it a lot less likely that these people can forge their prescriptions. It also helps out pharmacies too, because they can verify with the doctor that prescribed it what drugs are exactly coming in, so there's less chance for mistakes.
And in terms of rolling out this law, what are some of the difficulties of getting this to stick in New York State?
So really one of them is just kind of general laziness. As of about March 16th, only 60% of the medical centers in New York State have had them. That's a lot of retirement centers and major hospitals that didn't, because it's harder to establish in a larger system, and only 30% of them could prescribe the controlled substances. So it's a little harder for people who actually need OxyContin and Vicodin to get them because of these restrictions, but they want to make sure that things are secure. But they've known this was coming for about 4 years, so it's really on them that they haven't done this. Now they have waivers, so they have a little bit extra time to get it, so we'll see. It'll come up.
Dan Prager, thank you for joining us. It's been nearly a year since an Amtrak derailed in Philadelphia, killing 8 people and injuring over 200. Since then, there have been 4 major Amtrak crashes in the U.S., with the most recent one happening last Sunday, leaving 2 rail workers dead. The event has sparked concerns over the country's failing train infrastructure, and here to explain is Talking Points correspondent Sarah Nevins. Sarah, thank you for joining us.
Yep.
So let's start with this, these problems on Amtrak. What are some of the causes of this?
So recently, like the one on Sunday, was due to the 2 workers who died actually didn't secure permission to be on that track at the right time, so the track wasn't shut down. But an accident in Kansas last month that didn't result in any deaths was due to a truck actually hitting the track and moving the track a foot, and so the train ended up derailing. As for the accident that happened in Philadelphia last May, that was due to the train going too fast. It was going 100 miles in a 50-mile-per-hour zone. And investigators found that that accident would have been prevented had it been equipped with positive train control technology.
And that technology, a lot of countries with very intricate rail systems, all their trains have positive train control. So what exactly is that, and why don't trains in the U.S. have it?
Yeah, so basically it's an override system. If a train is going too fast and a turn is coming up, it can slow down. If it senses that there's something in the way, it can brake, and so that would prevent a lot of crashes. Congress actually passed a bill in 2008 that required all railways to have this technology installed by December 2015. That didn't happen. It's installed in Southern California and some areas of the Northeast Corridor. Basically, it didn't provide funding, but Congress did extend the deadline to 2018.
One of the things that's being mentioned a lot in this campaign, and one of the things that people say is one of the things Republicans and Democrats can compromise on, is infrastructure, bridges, roads, and trains. Our train infrastructure is not where it could be. So what sort of effect is that having on these trains?
So basically, there's just a lot of delays because investment in infrastructure isn't keeping up with the number of people who are riding on it. There's around 30 million people on it a day. Looking at the Northeast Corridor, there's 750,000 riders a day. And it really hasn't not been updated over the last 30 years. After the crash in Philadelphia in May, Republicans actually cut Amtrak's budget by 1/5, $250 million. They also rejected an amendment that would have put $800 million towards implementing PTC. And so basically, we used to spend about 5% of our GDP on Amtrak, on train infrastructure, basically. Now it's at 2.5%, while like Europe is still spending around 5% and Asia is spending around 10%.
Sarah, thank you for joining us. Coming up next, why has Oklahoma seen a massive increase in the number of earthquakes? We'll have the answer when we come back.
Your hair's a bit frizzy today. Oh, you should pick that up. Oh, you're such a dork. Loser. Here, let me help you with that. Oops.
Every day, kids witness bullying.
Oh, look. Your crush is looking at you. Poor you.
They want to help, but don't know how.
See, no one here's gonna help you, because no one
Teach your
likes you.
kids how to be more than a bystander. Visit stopbullying.gov.
Staring contest.
You still got it. I know.
Come alive with the forest. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
If you want to be a parent, it doesn't matter how you play or even what you wear. You just need to be there. Thousands of teens in foster care don't need perfection. They just need you.
There's been a huge surge in fracking over the last decade, and now more than 20 states are involved. Recently, scientists have been saying that the process, which helps provide us with natural gas, may actually be causing earthquakes. Here to break this down is Talk Point's science correspondent, Josh Feinblatt.
Fracking is a newer way to drill, baby, drill, because it doesn't really involve drilling at all. Fracking, which takes place in around half of the states in America, involves pumping millions of gallons of water, sand, and chemicals under high pressure into a well. Because of the high pressure, sort of like with the drill, the rock cracks, which releases the natural gas and oil that we use every day. Now, that physical act is not what's causing earthquakes, it is the liquid waste used in fracking. See, we have to dispose of the liquid waste somehow, and so what we do is consider the safest and most cost-efficient way of getting rid of it. We place the liquid into disposal wells, thousands of feet under the Earth's surface. By having these disposal wells embedded in our surface, we're helping to build pressure and, in a way, lubricate the faults underground. When the faults slip, that's when an earthquake is. A prime example of this is in Oklahoma, where there's a lot of fracking happening. The state used to average less than 2 3.0 or larger earthquakes per year. Now they average more than 2 per week. This means that places like Oklahoma are just as susceptible to earthquakes as the Southern California spot with the most fault lines. This is happening in many places. The average amount of 3.0 earthquakes in the USA has quintupled in recent years. I'm just focusing on Oklahoma because they're currently trying to stop this. The state regulators asked fracking companies to stop storing fracking water in the wells causing the earthquakes. Sandridge, a large fracking company, they have refused to go along with that. There has been blowback from people like Peg Littleton, a Colorado County Commissioner running for Senate. She said, "There have been earthquakes long before we ever did fracking. Let's be honest, you know God is in control of those, and not by us drilling down in the ground and doing the fracking." Human-caused earthquakes are not as strong as natural earthquakes, but that's for now. As of now, they're producing normal earthquakes, but a lot more of those earthquakes. If this continues, scientists believe that humans could be causing even more earthquakes with even higher magnitudes. Now back to you, Alex.
Finally tonight, I'd like to celebrate that the best time of the year is back, baseball season. It's a sport that unites all of us and often intersects with governments in ways good and bad, whether it's players testifying before Congress on steroid abuse or Curt Flood's contract dispute being argued before the Supreme Court. Some of the most notable people in government are and have been baseball fans. My favorite baseball and politics story comes from 1973. On the day Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned, the Mets and the Reds were playing a day game that would decide the National League pennant. At the same time, the Supreme Court was hearing oral arguments in a case, and Justice Potter Stewart, who was a huge baseball fan, had an aide bringing him updates on slips of paper after each batter. And one of the updates was, Cranepool flies to right, Agnew resigns. Baseball is a sport like no other. I think it's the most romantic sport in America today. No other sport is based so much around waiting for the action to happen. This tedium means that a ball game is the perfect time to talk to whomever you went with or to your fellow fans in your section, sharing only an allegiance to a team and a love for the game. It lets you fully take in your surroundings and notice things that you otherwise wouldn't have. The way the smell of hot dogs and peanuts mixes in the air to create a completely new, intoxicating aroma. The rhythmic way the batter sets up the exact same way in between every pitch. And the look of wonder in the eyes of the kid in your section whose dad has brought him to his first Major League game. It's been 15 years since I went to my first baseball game, but there are still times when I sit at a game, hear the crack of the bat, and I feel like that 6-year-old kid again, going to a game where a stadium was a cathedral and the players were gods. And that's so beautiful about baseball. So many things in culture and politics can change, but baseball stands the test of time, always reminding us that for all the distress and heartache, there is good and beauty in the world. So for the next 6 months, sit back, relax, and enjoy what is truly one of the greatest things America has to offer. And that's all the time we have for Talk Points this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to check out Citrus TV News on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Make sure to watch next week before the Democratic debate in Brooklyn. For Talking Points, I'm Alex Amico. Good night, Syracuse.